The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Sephora's biggest sale of the year is on. Get 20% off the best gifts, including makeup from brands like Rare Beauty.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
20% off skincare from brands like Glow Recipe and Summer Fridays.
These are my fave.
20% off hair care like Way and K18.
I'm obsessed.
And 20% off fragrances like Valentino, Donna, Born, and Roma.
So good.
20% off your purchase. Now through December 15th. Shop now at Sephora and Sephora at Kohl's.
Yeah, you were saying.
So,
this is a real meltdown happening.
no, because I get the little nip of whiskey to get the bass in my voice, but now my stomach kind of hurts.
Oh,
So
but refluxy.
Let's just put this out now. Let's wind it up there.
It's ready to
and
go.
put this out. Tēnā koutou katoa. This is Toby Manhire. It's gone by lunchtime. Probably the last one of the year. It's December the 12th. We might do a little extra bonus one for around New Year's time. We might do a countdown on New Year's. We'll be live 3 hours counting down. Or we might just do a cheeky little 15-minute one. What do you think, Annabelle?
Whatever.
Ben is on the line from Wellington. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just going to be walking around troubleshooting, trying to figure out why my internet doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, keep us posted. That's what the people want to know about. A few days till Christmas. Behooves me to mention that if you do want to buy a Christmas present for your loved one or your enemy, we're doing a live show at Q Theatre at some point in April. I can't remember
Did you pick a date yet of when
Yeah,
you're
we've
free?
settled on a date.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
okay.
I messed up.
Is
with the
that
first
after
date.
you unsettled on the last day?
Yeah. There was a little bit of an issue there that was all my fault, and we had to rebook it. But it's all fine now.
I mean, it's easy to forget that you're going to be in a whole other country.
Easy mistake to make.
Wednesday, 9th of April.
Wednesday, 9th of April.
Te Aihe Butler will be there, will you?
Pop it in.
Yeah,
Okay.
always.
Pop it in your diary.
There was
Toby.
a very good year in review last night at Q Theatre, chaired by Anna Rafiti Connell with a couple of guests, and they at the start when they announced everyone, and Anna mentioned Te Aihe Butler's name, and of course there's a ripple of applause, a little bit of kind of few hot flushes through the audience. I mean, the guy is powerful. He's a powerful man. He'll be there. You'll also be there, Ben, will you?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm gonna have to go to Auckland to go to an internet cafe.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. Probably we can find one for you. Today we're going to talk about very big boats, or slightly less bigger boats than the bigger boats.
Or ghost boats.
And we're going to talk about big bowls and maybe some more big year in review. I don't know. We'll see where we go. As you all know, regular listeners will be aware, we're, of course, some of New Zealand's leading maritime experts. No one better qualified to have discussions about boat-related issues, or ship-related issues, as we call them in the trade. It's been quite a time. The new government inherited a schmozzle, it's fair to say, in relation to the inter-island ferries situation. And they have continued to schmozzle it. And yesterday there was a big announcement that was, there was a lot of build-up, a lot of fanfare, a lot of you'll have to wait and you'll have to find out, and we've got it all there. And it's a very kind of, you can't open your stocking until Christmas Day.
Yeah. One of my favourite comments was
we're
someone...
back.
Oh,
Do you want to shift this to FaceTime?
Ben's back on the line, ladies and gentlemen. It's very exciting. Annabelle, you were saying.
I was just saying that it's very amusing with the benefit of hindsight to look at, to listen to some of the breathless commentary in the days leading up to this announcement about, Luxon being very coy, that obviously the deal was done, but they're keeping it on lockdown, and then yesterday happens.
It was, as some others have noted, it did remind us rather of what we saw under the Ardern government quite a lot, which was announcements about announcements. But this one was slightly different in that it was a plan to make a plan.
No, I disagree totally. This part of this is a failure to appreciate traditions, and Christopher Luxon, Nicola Willis, they have their own traditions that aren't the same as the Ardern government's. Their tradition is that in December they promise that they will release a mini version of something. So there was a mini budget last year in December, which when it arrived turned out to be, I think Willis revised it down to being a micro budget, which is to say it was the ordinary half-year economic and fiscal update plus 3 press releases promising to cut spending. And here we've got, a sort of kind of a small to middling announcement, reiterating that the ferry solution will be cheaper and that it'll be smaller and that it'll have something to do with the word rail. And
it'll be rail adjacent.
And honestly, I don't think there are any further questions that weren't answered on the FAQ sheet that was just
yeah. There were an awful lot of questions that were left dangling after this. The whole thing is like it's like a big ship going around in a circle in which someone has failed to work out how to turn off the autopilot. We're actually not that much more advanced. Just to recap very briefly, the IREX scheme under the last Labour government had got some big ships, some big ferries from Hyundai in South Korea, 550 million. The cost blew out crazy. Most of that was landside. Nicola Willis has talked about how she wanted to get more of a Toyota ferry rather than a Ferrari. But as she herself acknowledged, it's really about the palatial carports that were being built rather than the vehicle. So Kiwi Rail had been asking for up to $3 billion. Lots of this portside stuff was to do with some of it was to do with the length of the ships. A lot of it was to do with earthquake issues. Quite a bit. Some of it seems to have been mission creep on the parts of the ports. And
climate change too, right? The expectation of rising seas and stuff.
Yes.
And I think what we know about New Zealand, ship piloting, you probably want the wharf to be pretty reinforced around the sides.
Yeah.
Big kind of rubber sort of barriers that just sort of.
And so when the new government came in, Nicola Willis made a decision just to bin the whole thing. And some of that seemed a bit at the time, it seemed like a shot across the bows, to use a maritime metaphor, as we love to do on this New Zealand's leading sea-based podcast, that it was kind of sending a signal, wasn't it? It was kind of, we know more. And it was, that $3 million, and Kiwi Rail were being quite assertive, almost belligerent in their demands of the government. And the Labour government, the Labour now saying, well, we hadn't signed off on that $3 billion, et cetera, et cetera. But what we got yesterday looked like the manifestation of coalition difference. That is to say, quite a lot of what's happened in this really fast-paced year, when a lot of stuff has been pushed through, that was all there in the coalition agreements. This wasn't. This was an event, dear boy. This was something that sprung up, and clearly there's been a lot of difference. And you could see it in the way it shook out in this plan to have a plan. It was Winston Peters is appointed Minister for Rail, and he has a genuine love for the railways. He couldn't stop talking about Julius Vogel yesterday and this morning, and the rail sheds and all that. There's also, it goes to a Schedule 4 company that will do the procurement of these new ferries, about which we know relatively little. So there's David Seymour's bit. It's opens the door towards privatisation under that structure. And National was able to say, we're going to come in much lower, though we can't say how much, commercially sensitive, blah, blah, blah. But already, Annabelle, that started to splinter a bit. And this morning on the radio, after Seymour came out and sort of, issued a press release almost immediately during the press conference that he wasn't present at, sort of indicating that it was going to cost $2.2 billion and that it would open the door to privatization. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Winston on the radio this morning says he's wrong on the figures that he's used. He's wrong on the question of privatization, and he's wrong on the question of what it's going to cost. And that's quite... that is quite...
Because to be fair, no one knows what it's going to cost.
Well,
How could he possibly know?
There are a lot of known unknowns, aren't they, as Rumsfeld will put it. We don't know what the landside costs that will be incurred irrespective of the different side of the ship for earthquake strengthening and so on, nor do we know who or how those will be paid for. We don't know whether the ships will be electric hybrids like the IREX were, so, quite environmentally forward-looking. We don't know what the break fee is for the Hyundai contract. We don't know when the ships will be delivered. We don't know, and there's this question about rail compatible, is the term that some have used versus rail enabled. Though we don't know whether these ships will be roll on, roll off or road bridging. We don't.
Row, as we say in the marine
industry. That's what we say and that, in fact, that's our member-only podcast is called Rorocast, which you can find in the usual places. I don't know, where do we...
And then we also don't know what the cost of the additional maintenance that's going to be required for the existing ships to keep them seaworthy until 2029 or whenever it is that the boats
exactly.
arrive.
And one of the reasons this is in such sharp focus is because of the various issues that have arisen. One of them, of course, to do with the autopilot rather than and knowledge of, familiarity with the manual, it seems.
Gosh, we're really struggling with the autopilot in New Zealand, eh?
We've got real autopilot. I think we should just ban, like we banned phones in schools. We should just ban autopilots. All autopilots banned.
No.
Seriously though, Ben, this is not what you want going into Christmas in terms of looking like a unified coalition, looking like you're getting New Zealand back on track.
It is interesting, and it's exactly what you said, which is that this is one of the events that wasn't stipulated in the coalition agreement, and also one of the areas where you actually do see a sharp divergence between ACT and New Zealand First. A lot of people, including myself, expected that there would be a lot more conflict between the two coalition partners because of their very divergent views on the world. ACT are very deregulatory, let the private sector take the, and markets kind of do a lot of the work. New Zealand First, very interventionist, very sort of rebuild industry. Let's get a ministry of smokestacks. And that's kind of playing out. ACT wants. I think ACT, having realised that the government was committed to doing something as opposed to just leaving it to the one private ferry operator that still exists, was, they're very much in favour of something along the lines of a mixed ownership model or, PPP, something like that. Winston Peters, who's, noticeably softened on foreign investment recently and the need for it, but still very much wants, a big boat with a New Zealand flag painted on the side, and also different ideas about rail. Do you drive the train straight on and then the train drives off at the other end? That's rail enabled.
Ro-ro. That's ro-ro.
And or do you just have a space big enough to put railway carriages on and load them on and off? They're all railway adjacent. They're all railway themed, which is, I think, as much detail as we got in the press conference yesterday. But and also very interesting that Seymour put some numbers in his press release yesterday, which obviously the Minister of Finance and the newly anointed Minister of Rail, Winston Peters, were very careful not to do. I think I didn't hear the Peters interview this morning, but I saw Dan Brunskill from Interest tweeted about it, and his recollection of the quote was that Peters said, ignore all that, you're talking to the man in charge now. And I think, ACT might say, yes, you're talking to the man in charge now, up until May 31, 2025. And it is going to be increasingly interesting across a different, range of areas to see how they negotiate those sorts of differences. I don't think any decisions have been made on this when Winston Peters said, we'll have an announcement on the 11th.
Yeah.
So I think there was so I think we're seeing both of the coalition partners sort of using the bully pulpit of public communication to sort of advance their positions in the government.
I think most political watchers would agree that this is a pretty humiliating end of the year for the government. All of this time, and literally there is no plan in place. And essentially, the upshot of what the announcement says is that we actually don't have a plan, or we can't come up with one. So we're going to reach out to the private sector to see if they can formulate something for us. I mean, it does seem to be like the embodiment of, act in haste, regret at leisure. I think it doesn't bode well for the future of the coalition. I do think that this will be a line in the sand issue for Peters, and I think that given Seymour came out so quickly and so strongly and so specifically, demonstrates how set the views are between the three the three parties. I also thought it was quite telling that Luxon wasn't a part of the presser yesterday. I think it shows that he knows that this is not going to sit well and doesn't really want to be associated with it.
The upshot of all of this really is the power of these boats is untold, and we should build a tunnel under the Cook Strait, which everyone can, I'm sure, get along with. Toll it, so ACTA happy.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
'Tis the season to share the joy with the Instax Mini 40 Instant Camera. With a classic design, you can capture each and every festive moment and print them out on the spot. Make this holiday season unforgettable and gift the Instax Mini 40 Instant Camera. Don't just take, give. Visit instaxus.com to shop.
Hey guys, back at the playground again, huh?
Yep. You know what this playground could use? A wine country.
Heck yeah, and some waves, so we could go surfing. Oh,
yeah. Love that.
A redwood forest would be cool.
I'm in.
Ski slopes.
Let's do it.
Can a girl go shopping?
Yeah, baby.
Wait. Did we just invent California?
Discover why California is the ultimate playground at visitcalifornia.com.
In terms of the end of the year, Annabelle, we had a glut of polls in the last couple of weeks, which I know you will have been going over as a budding cephalogist. The latest was the One News variant, which came out on Monday, I think, was it? And that put kind of, again, the parties roughly around where they were at election time. The big mover being Te Pāti Māori, which had more than doubled from the election, from 3.1 in the election to 7% in the poll, appearing to be the big winner out of ACT's Treaty Principles Bill. The ACT number, pretty much the same, 8.6 in the election, 8 in that poll, although they might feel as though they have solidified that vote and that's not going anywhere now in terms of a particular constituency. What's your read on the polls as we go towards Christmas?
I think it's like a lesson in, is it Newton's third law, the equal and opposite reaction. I think Te Pāti Māori is benefiting from, what most would consider incredibly divisive legislation, and as a result it is drawing Māori voters and Māori non-voters. Apparently there's been a huge lift in Māori registering. And so, it's not surprising to see that Te Pāti Māori's numbers have really jumped. I guess the trick for them will be maintaining that momentum. I think probably Jerry Brownlee's done them another solid by referring them to the Privileges Committee, because it just, keeps their profile up and the sense of injustice that people would perceive that to be. It's interesting when you look at the polls and some of the big differences, specifically Curia, and I guess you could never accuse them of poll herding, act on 14% is a real outlier in that poll. But I think, overall what we're seeing is that the coalition are not where you might expect a government to be after just 1 year, on the Treasury benches.
What do you see in those polls, Ben? Another bit that sticks out, this comes from the Post Freshwater poll. Freshwater's an Australian polling company, done some polling for the Post and the Stuff Group, which had a...
Very, very good pollsters. Mike Turner was a former green strategist in Australia and was their pollster, and he was the pollster for the Wayne Brown for Mayor campaign.
Oh, Wayne Brown for Mayor.
Yeah, it's extremely.
One of the things I did notice in that poll, at least in the way that it was presented, was on the preferred Prime Minister question, where Hipkins beat Luxon by 1 point, 42 to 41. I think it was presented as a head-to-head. But
which is an unusual way to do preferred.
But also, they were just the choices that people were given, if the graphic is to be believed, were Christopher Luxon or Christopher Hipkins. And I'm wondering whether Labour have done some polling on that themselves, that maybe Hipkins needs to rebrand as Christopher, and then he will, maybe that's the time for that. But on the wrong track, right track in that poll, which, a lot of people look at as the kind of the king metric and was talked about a lot, of course, in the American election recently. The Post-Freshwater poll had wrong track 48, right track 35, and in a way, whether it's through interest rates and inflation or whatever, that's the one that needs to move to really, for Christopher Luxon to feel more chipper.
Yeah, and it should be noted that right track, wrong track, and economy is good, economy is bad. The previous government was racking up record numbers on that, in terms of net negatives. So, it really is about the economic backdrop, I guess,
Sure.
and the continuing pain that people are facing with high interest rates, sluggish economy because of that, Reserve Bank engineered recession to deal with the inflation problem that was previously everyone's biggest bugbear. That now seems to be sort of under control, but the bad news keeps coming. Treasury and the Finance Minister have both been sort of slightly less than soft launching the idea that the half-yearly economic and fiscal update that will be out probably
December 17, I think?
Next week, yeah. Just before Parliament breaks, that's going to be worse news. We've seen the Crown accounts continue to deteriorate. Revenue is down, spending is up on what was projected in the budget 2024, and so I think the very strong hints are that there's no real significant growth expected until the latter half of next year, and that's obviously bad for people. Unemployment will rise. And the vibes will be off in the country. And look, in a way, I think the coalition government will be pretty happy that, by and large, apart from that cluster of 3 polls that were taken sort of just before and just after the Hikoi, all of which showed very, very close, probably trending left bloc victory, but then sort of even a reversion to the mean sort of very soon afterwards in the Taxpayer Union and Varian polls. I think they'd be reasonably happy with that, given how garbage the economy has been and how just how miserable and depressed most people in New Zealand are right now. Especially, you see the incumbency effect all around the world, governments toppling at record rates this year. And so, I think they would be reasonably happy to have stood still after a year.
You mentioned the haifu, Ben, and that's there's a lot being crammed in. We had the emissions reduction plan this week. We had the greyhounds greyhound racing ban. There's a lot going on in this last part of the year. Is that a result of these quarterly plans? What's going on? Is this
Yeah. So I think the quarterly plans, which I was quite bullish on when they were announced, because I think, it's a good idea, just like giving a speech or making a presentation. When you're governing, you should say what you're going to do, you say when you're doing it, and then you say what you've done. It seems to be, though, that maybe the quarterly plans, I'd be interested to see what the actual granularity is and when you sort of zone in on them, because what we're seeing right now is just enormous numbers, prodigious amounts of announcements being made. I think there's something like 13 or 14 government press releases released on one day last week. There's a huge logjam of stuff going through cabinet committees and through Parliament, and actually, when you go and look back at the year, the House is in urgency right now to plough through a lot of that stuff the government wants done. And if you actually go back, the two last big periods of significant periods of urgency in the House actually coincided exactly with the last week of the quarterly plan. So I think maybe Luxon is listening and learning in his first year as PM, and I think that it might be worthwhile sort of staggering the homework due dates of your 28 ministers, because the problem is that you don't want all of them reaching the decision gate at once, because they'll kind of cram it up, right?
The big rocks.
Because you're meant to chunk things down to get to the decision gate, but if you have 28 chunks, 28 people bringing their chunks all at the same time and trying to push them through the gate, it'll be like Mr. Burns and the viruses, like jammed in the door. And so I think that's interesting. We're actually finding I'm finding these these year in review sort of interviews with Luxon very illuminating in terms of I guess marking him against his own KPIs, which is his business management and improvement books.
Yeah, you've been paying a lot of attention to these. Are you doing a doctorate thesis in Christopher Luxon's end of year interviews?
I'm going to be writing a management book of 12 lessons for But there was one with Gina Lynch on Stuff, where she is now as part of the new 3 News supplied by Stuff, and the takeaway from that was in explaining that explaining this sort of kerfuffle that came out of the Q&A interview, where Jack Thames said, well, I checked with David Seymour and he said the Treaty Principles Bill was not a bottom line in the coalition, or rather Seymour said that he didn't threaten to walk away as a result of, Treaty Principles Bill. And Luxon went to further explain that by saying, in this interview with Jenna, saying, we parked that issue, we agreed to park that issue because of the strong feelings on each side, and we negotiated everything else first, and then we came back to that.
Yes.
And if there's one thing that I learned from Christopher Luxon during those negotiations, when public commentary was very limited, and he just talked us through a bit of his process, you place the big rocks first. You have to place the big rocks first, because then you can fit the little rocks around them. If you put the little rocks into the glass jar first, there's no way of fitting the big rocks in later.
But maybe you need to get some easy wins. Don't you get some low-hanging fruit and get some little rocks, and then you provide a bed of little rocks for
Absolutely
your big rock?
Not. No, the first thing we heard from the Prime Minister with the negotiations
was that they
were going to elevate the big rocks. So you lift the big rocks like Obelix in the Asterix comics, and you lift them up and then you place them.
Menhirs.
And if something has such strong feelings that you don't want to talk about, that's clearly going to be a big rock. So, I mean, rookie mistake.
I think your management guide should come with some illustrations of this process of the lifting of the big rocks and the order.
Well, just a size chart, big rock next to a little rock next to a tiny rock, a little pebble. But I mean, seriously, in terms of it's a very strange negotiation tactic, because the thing with the negotiating for a coalition agreement is that it is so multipolar. There's so many different dimensions you can negotiate. You can negotiate portfolios, you can negotiate funding, you can negotiate, pure policy stuff. So there are all these dynamic factors in, and you would think that something like the Treaty Principles Bill, where there are these entrenched positions on both sides, what you would be trying to do is kind of create a package to negotiate with, as opposed to just going, we want this thing, and then you meet in the middle with, as Luxon said, a compromise that he's not happy with and he doesn't think David Seymour is happy with. Although, looking at the polling, I think, and the media coverage, I think David Seymour was very happy with it.
Maybe what would have been better is if they'd set up a quarry.
Right, Shane Jones would be like, we can get as many rocks as you want.
Fast track quarry.
You blow up the big rocks into smaller rocks, and then you ship them out to the regions.
Yeah, I've found more room for the rocks. There's room for the rocks on this rare sail colony.
Rock compatible ferries.
You build
roll on, roll off, row.
The wharfs. The wharfs get made out of the rocks.
Yep. Coastal shipping.
I-rocks.
Chris
rocks, I-rocks.
Can we just return to the polls,
That's your slogan for the next
very
election.
quickly. Yeah, very quickly.
The Blue Water one, it was really interesting, and I assume it's because Luxon is a teetotaler, or maybe it's because of how societal attitudes have changed. But there was no question of who would you rather have a beer with. It was who would you rather, out of Hipkins and Luxon, want to take a long car ride with.
Ooh.
And I guess that's for methodological purposes, because if you said, would you rather have a Pepsi Max with Christopher Luxon or a Coke Zero with Chris Hipkins, then there might be brand contamination.
But so you instead go to long car ride. That sounds a little
long
bit,
car ride,
I don't know, murdery, doesn't it? sort of picturing kind of a bleak 1970s noirish.
I'd rather be on Winston's bus, I reckon.
Oh, yeah. Whose bus would you bet? Yeah. Mm.
I'd get on Winston's bus, I reckon.
And what was the result? What was the result of that question, Ben?
Hipkins won long car ride.
Okay. Interesting.
Which is interesting because you would want to, John Key, of course, would have always won that. You know what they should do? They should do who would you rather ride the log flume at Rainbow's End with? That's one of my long-running ideas, which I have failed to quite gather complete support from my colleagues for yet. But a series of interviews on the log flume.
Oh, that's genius.
And you start it when you're queuing for the log flume and you sort of talk to them and then you go up and the log flume, you kind of rattle around, right? And then you get to the bit and right at the end you ask like the money question.
Yeah.
Will you resign or whatever?
Yeah.
And then you tip down the vertical, the steep bit of the log flume and then you wind it up there and it's just a neat little 5-minute product.
That's so good.
All right. I think that's enough on that absolutely magical idea. And look, thanks for hanging out with us this year. We might be able to squeeze out a little extra bonus one, but it'll only be short because there's stuff to do. Thanks, Ben.
Hey, no worries. If you guys have any tech problems, let me know.
Thanks, Annabelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, T.I. here. Thank you, listeners. We are very grateful for your company. Keep telling us what you think about things. Kia ora, goodbye.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spinoff, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, @thespinoff.co.nz.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.